Well, yesterday, Julie Nixon Eisenhower, a woman who has been in the public eye since she was born, literally, was passing through New York, and I was lucky enough to catch up with her here in the book department. She has a new book out. We talked about that and other things. I think you'll find this interesting. So let's go to the book department.
I'd like to see it.
Julie Nixon Eisenhower. Julie, how do you go about selecting, of all the people you've met in your life, you have met hundreds of special people since you were a little girl, how do you select 6 to write about?
Well, these 6 people were all people who are very public, or have led public lives, and yet I felt that there was something interesting about their private lives. And that I also thought in many cases that the public perception was not the full perception of the person, and I wanted to show what they were like.
Right.
A full dimension portrait. For example, with Mamie Eisenhower,
your grandmother.
Right.
Right.
I think that she has kind of a flat, boring image, and she's anything but flat. She's one of the most lively, funny people.
What makes that happen, though? I mean, I guess if you took a poll, maybe her image would be kind of dull.
Well, I think in the case of Mamie, she just wasn't concerned with her image. She didn't have a press secretary when she was the First Lady. She rarely gave interviews. You know, she's a very natural person, and you know, you just knew very little about her. So you just got the idea that she was a political wife, and you read into that she was sort of a docile character who went along supporting her husband. But
not the case?
Not the case.
Well, then let's break down those preconceptions about Mamie Eisenhower. Tell us some things about Mamie Eisenhower we don't know that are away from the public image.
Well, Mamie Eisenhower set foot in the Oval Office less than a dozen times in the 8 years her husband was president. She just wasn't interested in, she was interested because it was Ike and she loved him.
Sure.
But she made it very clear that when he came home from the office at night, it was going to be talk about her family and about their concerns, and she really drew the line on that.
Do you think that a First Lady could do that today? I mean, openly admit that they weren't really that interested in what was going on, that they were just interested in their husband, or?
I think that they could, because I think people want to see the real person, and if the public had known that this was Mamie's attitude, I think they would have been, it would have been refreshing, because she is so natural. I mean, she's just herself.
But is it, excuse me, go ahead.
You're right. I think that we now do expect First Ladies to have concerns and causes. But then again, I think that a Mamie Eisenhower, being such a real person and so natural, and also she did, of course, do a lot of entertaining in the White House and fulfilled her job that way.
Sure, well, that's part of the job.
And one thing that she was it wasn't just entertaining, it was how the entertaining was done that she cared about. For example, she couldn't stand footprints in the carpet, so before a party she would go down and inspect, and if there were footprints in the carpet, she'd have somebody be there, you know, with the bristle vacuum cleaner. It's a handheld thing, getting rid of the footprints.
I guess everyone have, you know, everybody has a style they like to make it right. You know, I was wondering, I guess a lot of people wondered, because I don't know if there was ever a public reaction, that Kay Summersby book about Kay Summersby's relationship with Dwight Eisenhower. Did that devastate Mamie? I mean, when that whole thing came out, and now I understand it's going to be made in a movie, what was her reaction to that? I
think that she, of course, was hurt, and I think it's very sad that that book came out while she's still living. Who will ever know if the romance was true? The 2 people involved are both dead. And Mamie's the first to say that there were times in her marriage when all was not smooth. I mean,
how long were they married? 50 years? I mean,
over 50 years.
Anybody's marriage goes through things.
But I thought it was unfortunate the book came out when it did.
Right. I'd like to ask this about Mao. You said in the beginning that you wanted to find something, you know, an off guard or the personal moments. What did you observe about Mao Zedong that falls into that category?
Well, we met Mao just a few months before his death, and during our meeting with him, we really sensed that he was aware of his mortality. He knew that he was a god to over 800 million people, and yet he also knew that once he died, that his concept of a continuing revolution might not last. And so he seemed so eager to tell us, even, you know, us 2 Americans, 2 people who weren't in power, he wanted to tell us how important it was to struggle. He said, without struggle, there is no life for any people. And he told us that young people are soft. They have to be reminded of the need for struggle. He seemed aware that he was mortal, a mortal man. And we were made aware of his his kind of humble position because he was surrounded by nurses. And when he leaned forward, there would be a nurse there to comb his hair so he would look right for the photograph. And there were 3 interpreters who tried to decipher his speech because it was garbled. He'd had a stroke. So it was a very poignant meeting.
And with Golda Meir, another one of the 6 people in your book, Special People, you say that she was a woman, if you asked her something that she didn't want to be asked, she turned into granite, like stone. What did you ask her that made Golda Meir just stop in her tracks?
Well, she just didn't answer. She didn't want to comment. And I think that the main thing, I wanted to know more about the Yom Kippur War. This is the shadow that hangs over a great woman, the fact that she really had to leave office because in the aftermath of the war. And but she said that she wrote an autobiography and she reiterated to me that there is still so much that can't be revealed about the war, about the intelligence reports. But I know that this is a burden on her because she cared so deeply about casualties when she was prime minister. She wanted to be awakened in the middle of the night if there were ever news of casualties, and then to have this war hit Israel unexpected under her leadership. This is the area that
she just tensed up all about. Yeah.
Right.
You know, another thing I'm wondering about is, I think that, as we all know from knowing the history of your family, that there is sort of there has been a definite antipathy between you and the press, between the Nixon family and the press. But in putting together, well, you know what I'm talking about.
I think in some cases,
in some cases.
Right.
It's not in all cases, but in some cases. In putting together this book, you kind of have become a reporter or a correspondent.
Yes, right.
How are you handling yourself differently than some of the people that you and your father and mother have criticized over the years in the press?
Well, I think, first of all, that, you know, the one thing I tried to get away in my book was to generalize too much, and I think it is a generalization to say that there have been battles with the Nixon family and the press, because, for example, my mother has always had a very marvelous press, and I think she's a very loved person.
That's correct.
And I felt that when I was so active in my father's administration, that, you know, with cancer research or the environment or whatever, that I always, you know, I thought that the press really wrote about it responsibly. But as far as what I tried to do in this book, you know, I drew a line for myself. I decided I didn't like vacuum cleaner journalism. That's the journalism.
Is that your own term?
No, I wish it were. It's a great one. But that's the journalism where you go around and you write down everything you hear about a person, and then you read great momentous things into it. For example, because you like to dive, let's say, we decide that you really are a coward at heart because what you're trying to prove yourself every time you go up on the high dive. And I think that maybe in recent years we've gotten into this trend of getting into the bedroom and writing about people, or really going beyond the bounds of a good, perceptive writer. I mean, you can be perceptive about a person and go into a subject in depth without reading someone else's mind, trying to read someone else's mind, or really printing things that may not be relevant. And I try to be very careful in handling these public people, because I've been in a position myself.
Did you have a chance to talk to her about her father?
Well, that's interesting, because when I knew I was going to be interviewing Julie Nixon Eisenhower, I had a lot of things I was just curious about. But one word we got from the publisher was, you can't mention anything about her father. And then another word we got was that it would be okay. So what I really did was, once we started to talk, I think that we were really having a conversation. And so I just asked her some things about her father, Richard Nixon, that I was genuinely curious about. And in the next segment, you'll see what happens. We'll take a break and we'll get into that after this.
And her mother?
Her mother, yeah. I wonder, just a couple of things. I mean, just seriously curious. Did you watch all of the interviews, the David Frost interviews with your father?
Yes. Did you get a chance to see them all?
I saw some of each, but not all of all, because of work, actually. Although I was, from a historical standpoint, I was interested in seeing them all. I'm curious to know about how you would evaluate David Frost's role in interviewing your father.
That's a good one. That's a new twist to the whole Frost interview questions. I thought that he had an almost impossible job. He had 29 hours of taping, and he had the ultimate decision to what to cut. And I think that probably overall he did a fine job of cutting, but there were just so many things I wish that they had covered in those broadcasts that they had left in. I know that they covered and weren't able to leave in. So I don't know how to assess it, because I just wouldn't have wanted to have to cut 29 hours to 6.
No, I know from when we try to put together a 67-minute show out of a couple hours, it's very difficult. But in terms of evaluating David Frost as an interviewer, you know, a man who was sitting in just a one-on-one with your father, do you think that he asked enough hard questions? Do you think
Bill,
that he was well prepared?
I really don't. I couldn't tell. For one thing, I wasn't at the 29 hours.
Yeah.
So I just wouldn't want to comment on it.
All right.
Would you have liked to have been in the spot? Or you're not in hard news journalism?
I would have tackled it if somebody had given me the opportunity. I think David Frost did a good job. You know, basically, I think did a very good job. Another thing I'm just genuinely, sincerely interested in is how your mother is. Because
you're nice to ask.
Yeah,
she is doing much better, and she. In fact, we're at Bloomingdale's now.
Yes.
A friend of mine just sent her some salt-free foods from Bloomingdale. She has high blood pressure. That's one of the lingering problems. And so she's been eating the Bloomingdale version of salt-free foods. So, but she's a great lady, and I hope that she'll be able to be more active in a while.
So the prognosis is good for a complete
Well, she
recovery?
certainly is much more fortunate than some stroke victims who are confined to wheelchairs. She can get around.
When you heard that your mother had this stroke, I mean, I can imagine how I would feel if it happened to me. God forbid that my mother had a stroke. Did you feel at the time that it happened that it was related to the Woodward and Bernstein book, The Final Days, in any way?
I think that it was related, yes, of course. There were many, different reasons for the stroke, but that was one of the major.
If you were to run into, in some social situation, Woodward and Bernstein, what would you say to them?
I wouldn't say anything. I'm not going to judge them. They, they wrote a book. I don't think that they used full integrity, but, I wouldn't judge them. They have to live with themselves, right? We all do.
Absolutely. How long after your family left the White House and went back to California, how long after that did it take for you to have some sense of harmony in your own life? Because
that's my next book. Okay?
What's it called?
I don't know, but it certainly is part of my story. I think that there are many glimpses of me finding values, finding things that were important to me in this book. I think that's why I wrote about Anne Lindbergh, because she's a woman who's led a public life and has faced a lot of tragedies in the public eye.
And what is that quote that she says in the book?
Life is a gift given in trust, like a child. I think that's one
That's a beautiful quote. But the one about fame was very poignant to me, recognizing that you had chosen to include it in your book.
Yes, when she said that fame is a kind of death, it arrests life around you. And she said at another time that people always catch us unawares. We never catch people unaware. I mean, they're always looking at us. We can never look at them. They're always there. And I think you're less spontaneous if you're in the public eye many times. You have to be more guarded with what you say. And this is what Anne Lindbergh writes about so eloquently in her diaries.
And yet, the thing that's interesting about it, I choose to be a public figure, right? You really didn't choose to be you were born into a family that was already well established. But there is that conflict there between what we do to become a public figure and then what happens to us as a result of being a public figure.
That's right.
I wonder whether or not you, on any level, you sense that your father regrets his doing what he did in his life because of the physical and the emotional toll that it has ended up taking on him.
Choosing a political career, you mean? Yeah.
Choosing a political career, but really coming out of what we were talking about, being a public figure, and your quotation about fame and the kind of death.
But see, I have this theory, and I talk about it in the chapter on Golda Meir about seeking power. I think that most people who go into public life or into politics aren't power seekers. In a sense, it happens to them, these events. They believe in something, like Golda believed in the dignity of the Jewish people. And my father believed in a certain way of government. He had certain ideas. And so he worked to accomplish those goals, but then the power comes to you. You don't go seeking the powers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get caught up in events and in a life.
Right.
We could talk about that for hours.
Absolutely. I want to ask one other thing related to the so-called Watergate era, and that is the one thing I would have asked had I been in David Frost's seat would have been whether or not your father had any sense of the toll that was being taken on the country during Watergate. Now, I'm not just meaning what Richard Nixon was, quote, doing to the country, but the fact that the people were really upset. You know what I mean?
Bill, that's one reason he resigned, of course. I mean, if you've read his statements,
yeah.
if you remember the resignation speech, and if you even heard part of the broadcasts, he says that. You know, he says that it wasn't fair to the country. I mean, he did go to the Middle East in June. He did go to the Soviet Union in June, 2 more months before he resigned. He was negotiating for peace in the Middle East. I mean, things were still happening, but the country was crippled, so.
Did it bother you, no, did it bother you that...
I really didn't come here to talk about all that.
Can I ask you one other question about David Frost? And then I'll drop it. I will. Did it bother you that David Frost asked for an apology? When you saw that,
I'm not going to comment on it, okay?
Okay.
Okay?
That's fair enough.
Okay.
And that's just about as far as Julie was willing to take it in that conversation.
Well, do you think she held back a lot from you?
I think that she's in a natural position of defense because of the fact that she loves her father. I mean, just reduce it to very basic terms. This is Richard Nixon's daughter. She loves her father. She doesn't want him to be hurt anymore. In her eyes, he's already been hurt a great deal, right?
On a personal level.
On a personal level. I mean, I reduce it to that. I was interviewing the man's daughter. So I think that she is naturally guarded. I don't think she wants to say things that are going to make big newspaper headlines, that her father's going to pick up the paper in San Clemente and he's going to go like this, oh no, just another horrible thing.
So she's learned enough so that she doesn't do that. She knows how to handle...
Well, that would be the answer to your question.
An interviewer. But did you like her on a personal basis?
Very much. I would say that she was an extremely naturally, not artificial, naturally charming woman. I was very impressed with her.